submit for, basically the graphics you see on the screen, the two T-hanger and hangar layouts at both Queen City and at Braden. Both of them weren't awarded due to basically the PennDOT budget limits and the overall costs of those, what you see on the screen here. So we actually had our annual meeting. Tom and I went down to meet with PennDOT, or actually virtually this year, to discuss basically a phase submittal. And I know we've talked about that a little bit in some of our other committee meetings regarding how can you break up the civil and building construction, or at least a phase development. For example, for Queen City, the picture on the top right, there's a set of T hangars and four, individual larger single unit hangars. So we could definitely phase that approach to try and, take little pieces of the pie for the capital budget. So just as an example, the picture on the far right there, the total build out of all that is about 6.3 million, which is again a pretty large price tag. The site work for most of that is just under $1 million. So that component might help if we're submitting for the applications. And I know we've talked a little bit about other third parties that might be interested in building hangars if we have kind of the state funding to do some of the site work piece of that. And again, same thing at Braden, just for that single T hangar. As you'll see, is kind of right where one of those shelter tie downs are. Again, site work's less than $1 million. To actually develop that, is somewhere around 3 million if you add all the paving and the other pieces to it. So again, trying to be strategic regarding those components. And in terms of timing, basically the way the capital budget works is in the fall, which typically somewhere around October, November, they open the window for about a month to apply, and then you don't hear anything for about a year. So as we mentioned, the 2019 grant applications we submitted last fall, we heard about, basically a month or two ago from a timing perspective. So the plan, again, once we look at everything in discussions with the state, is we'll see what we can submit for. Obviously budget dependent, because these grants are all 50-50 match. So we still have to have 50% of the project costs in hand. And as Todd alluded to, it's kind of working through those pieces as best we can. But in general, just kind of wanted to, I believe that's the last slide, just wanted to update kind of the group on some of those timings. And again, the hangar piece that we're still evaluating, it just comes down to the state funding component, as we've mentioned, which is, hangar 11 was a perfect example regarding making that feasible from that standpoint.
Thanks, Ryan. Just really quick question on PennDOT, this last slide. We let our local legislators know about our project designs and submissions in advance of making those submissions, correct? Just to get them on board with whatever we're proposing.
We do talk through our capital program with Harrisburg and make sure they're on board, they understand.
With PennDOT or with our local legislator
Both.
Delegation? Okay.
Both.
So it goes through Harrisburg, it doesn't go through a district office?
It does not.
Okay. Thanks, Ryan. That's it.
Larry Hamburger.
Good. Thanks, Larry.
I had a question regarding. Good morning. I had a question regarding Hangar 11. As we wrap up the construction site, how are we doing tenant-wise?
So I guess we'll turn to Darren for a response on that one.
Sure. So we have one tenant in there, one lease signed, tenants moved in. Second tenant, we're working through a lease right now. Looks positive, but we'll see. I mean, they've agreed to basic terms. We're just going through the lease terms right now. So some of the legal stuff, we have a call with them or with the solicitor's office this afternoon to go through that.
Awesome.
And then come back. So hopefully a second tenant.
Very good.
In the queue and looking for more. So
how many can you fit?
it just depends on the mix of aircraft. I mean, it could be 5, it could be 20. It just depends on what you're putting in there.
But I think the other thing that we've done is, just in terms of advertising and marketing, really pushing out in a lot of places now.
Yeah.
To try to get the word out. So, Colin, I know you've been working on some of that as well.
Yeah. So we've done social media, we've done videos, we've done got it picked up in several publications, so people are seeing it. So
we've done e-blast.
Yeah, e-blast.
It's got its own web page at this point in time.
Yeah.
Kind of own separate Hangar 11 website.
Nice.
Definitely pushing it around as much as we
Brian, you had a couple questions?
Yeah, okay, so thank you. And I have seen those notices out in some of those publications. So a nice job by Colin and Darren on those. The epoxy floor looks really great there in Hangar 11. And I know
Look at that,
from
Frank.
a mechanic's standpoint, that highly reflective epoxy floor, how it reflects in the underside of the airplane when they're working on it, is highly advantageous. And so great job there. A comment on Queen City. Ted Rosenberger now, I don't know how many of you know, his company now has a Citation jet, a Mustang. So that means he's doing charter with King Air, a Citation, and the helicopter. And I understand he's very busy. So, I mean, having an active charter company, customers, activity, from a GA standpoint, I'm really happy to see the VIP parking, the work on the pavement, the work on the trees, all of these things moving forward. I mean, we have an active, and the flight schools, I mean, I know they've been hit hard by this, but I know Ted's charter is moving forward, so
That's great.
that's all good. Ryan, can you go to your slide on the fire suppression system for just a second?
Or, yeah, keep going down.
Yep.
There they go. Yep.
Okay, so I just wanted to offer a comment on this. I read a great article.
Yep.
While these can be technically a nightmare if they go off. We had this go in Morristown. A maintenance person accidentally tripped this system and it filled the hangar, not our hangar, fortunately, but someone else's hangar, unfortunately, and it filled it with about 8 feet of foam. Well, it's more than just cleaning it out and washing everything off. The insurance companies they require a teardown of a number of things, including the wheels and the brakes, which for a Gulfstream 550 can be many hundreds of thousands of dollars. And all those are gone. You throw the brakes away, you throw the wheels away. So from an insurance company, I mean, this can be a costly insurance claim. All my point in all of this is whatever can be done by LNAA. Yes, we want to prevent fires, but we also must do whatever we can to prevent it from going off unintentionally, because it will be very, very expensive.
Darren's not allowed in that room.
I've had it happen at another previous job. We had a hangar with dump foam. We stopped it after about 2 feet, but we replaced brakes and wheels on a Global, so I know exactly what Brian's talking about. It is an expensive mistake, we'll say.
Okay. My last comment.
One of the things, Brian, I'll just quickly add is part of the reason for the upgrade was the existing 1956 fire suppression system and valves failed, and we had a discharge a few years ago now. Fortunately not foam, but water was enough with a lot of open panels on airplanes at the time that caused some damage. So we are very sensitive to your comment, and we understand very well the challenge here. So we appreciate your insight, and we are ensuring that we have a very well-designed system that would not provide any issues with accidental trips. I mean, things like our infrared heat in the ceiling and all of those things can end up creating issues. So we spent a lot of time making sure we got this one right.
I'm glad. This can be something that it's sometimes just thought of as another system in the building, but for those of us in the business aviation industry, this can be not only is it expensive, but it can then take your planes out of circulation and out of use for a while for all this to happen. So it's a big deal. It's a big deal. The last comment I would have would be for the applications on the funding. I appreciate the update on that. I'm sad that they did not approve, especially the two for Queen City and Braden. I know as a former tenant in Braden that those T hangars are in pretty rough condition. I mean, just getting the doors open and everything can be a challenge on those. So I would just add my voice to encourage to apply again, do whatever steps are necessary to see if we can enhance our ability to secure those. And I appreciate the excellent effort here by Ryan, Darren, Tom, everybody to help move these things forward. I know it's a ongoing challenge, but you have been very successful before with Hangar 11 and runway and lots of other things. And so my encouragement is just to keep pressing forward on this and keep hammering away.
Thank you, Brian. And I'd add in just, it is great to see the level of effort that's being put into satisfying the needs of the general aviation community in the Lehigh Valley through our airport system. And it's a great update, and I think there's some really encouraging news for the next few years based on what Ryan's reporting out to us right now. Megan, I know you're on the line with us. Any thoughts based on the presentation that you're seeing here? She is muted. We can leave it to her. Well, you can chime in whenever. Got a comment, maybe. There we go. Thank you. Really appreciate the updates. We do too. If there's no other additional information to offer on the GA update, we're going to take advantage. We do have Chris Worley on the line, which has afforded us a quorum. So we're going to take advantage of Chris's presence to move through these action items, if it's okay with everybody. Starting with the approval of the meeting minutes, which you should be able to find in Novus. I'll take a motion to approve the meeting minutes as presented.
I'll make a motion.
So moved.
Got second. We'll give Tara the second on that one. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, the minutes are approved. It looks like we did receive the award on the ACE grant. Tom, who's going to do a quick update on this one?
We'll ask Ryan to do that, and we can have him run through it.
Ryan, do you want to run through this one real quick? We've gotten detailed information on this one in the past, but it looks like we just need a quick update on the amount and allow us to accept the award.
Yep. Yeah. So thanks, Matt. Yeah. So in February, we had brought to the board for approval the submission that was required for the grant application. We submitted for about $2 million worth of costs, which was basically the maximum allowed. We were awarded about almost $821,000 for project costs associated with reaching LEED Gold requirements as part of an energy savings component. So basically, what this allows us to do is offset some of the costs. It's a 50-50 match, but just as a note, the 50-50 match is not necessarily needed for LEED project elements. It's just to show that your project is more than half or more of the 820,000. So again, for a connector project that we're working on, that's definitely not going to be an issue for that one. So basically the big thing with this, and I believe Schuard talked a lot about it with Cedric and his group when we presented it before, is within 180 days after project completion, you're required to provide the LEED Gold certificate that you get upon certificate of occupancy. So if we don't get that, you have to pay back the grant. But from everything that we're showing and including, we're pushing for that LEED Gold certification, which again lowers our operating costs, is definitely better for the environment, and has some savings and health benefits that I know Cedric's going to go into in his connector update. But we really just need approval from the board to accept the grant, and then authorize Tom Stout, the executive director, to sign the agreement.
And we issued our displeasure at not receiving the full amount, presumably in a politic way.
We did, but I think we were grateful when we understood how many applicants there were. I think the issue wasn't that they didn't recognize the value of the project. It was actually just didn't have the funding to go around to everything. And I think the good news for us is our goal was LEED Gold. you know, certainly we had some additional elements in that 2 million, things like solar and other elements we were really shooting for here. But obviously those are things that we probably won't be able to reach based on the funding level. So we can still get to LEED Gold. And, you know, the state was, you know, they certainly understood what we were trying to accomplish, but unfortunately they just didn't have the funding to go around.
Gotcha. Yeah, there are actually only 2 recipients that were approved, Pennsylvania Public Schools and the airport.
Oh, wow.
wow.
So that was it. Everyone else
So
denied.
maybe we won't be so vociferous in our discontent. Make the, you know, take anything away from the kids. Great. I would ask for a motion to accept the ACE grant via CFA and to authorize Tom to execute any required agreements.
And I will just caveat quickly that the judge did review this agreement and found it acceptable. So,
Good. Thank you. Tara will move to accept. Can I get a second?
Second.
Thank you, Brian. All in favor of accepting the grant agreement, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, great. Thank you very much. Final is just a quick item on a lease for aircraft refueling vehicles related to World Fuel's extension. Darren's going to walk us quickly through that one.
Yeah, I'll do this as quick as possible here. So we lease most of our fuel trucks currently. 4 of them leases coming up due at the end of September. We replacing those 4, 3 of them with lake vehicles, so 2 5,000-gallon trucks and the 3,000 we'll be replacing with lake vehicles. One is a 10,000 we're actually going to replace with a slightly smaller 7,000-gallon unit. Reason for that is just that gives us a little more utility. The 10,000 on this main terminal ramp is just too big, so we don't use it over here too often. So the 7 will give us the opportunity to use it here more. So overall, actually saving about $20 a month. Thought you can have that, so you should be happy.
I was going to say, what's talking to do with the $20? Where's my phone?
I'll give it to you. Don't you worry. You got it. So yeah, and these will run concurrently with the fuel supply agreement. So at the end of when we go out for RFQP in 5 years, we'll actually RFQP everything at the same time for new fuel trucks along with it. So certainly answer any questions.
Any questions for Darren related to this one? What's the term of this agreement?
5 years.
5 years. So this will kind of coincide with the...
Be exactly the same.
Yeah. Any questions? I entertain a motion to approve the extension of the lease for aircraft refueling vehicles.
So moved.
I'll second.
Whoever that was. Tara will get a second. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay,
Thanks.
extension's approved. Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Thank you, Chris, for jumping in. I did see that Megan, if you can pull that chat up, I think Megan had some comments. If you're off mute, Megan, now would be a great time to jump in.
Oh, okay, thank you. I appreciate that opportunity. I really appreciate the updates for GA. It's really, appreciated on our end. We do have a priority in the GA community, and I'm speaking, for all the people, the pilots and tenants that I talk to have a two-way channel of communication regarding plans and status and issue in between quarterly updates. I mean, Colin's doing a great job with the, meeting discussion items for when there's a GA meeting or something like this. He's also doing a great job with GA Today newsletter. That's all one way. The people that I'm always talking to really liked what was happening after the town hall meetings at Braden and Queen City, where when they put in their concerns, even if it was just on a whiteboard during a town hall meeting, it was listed. They could see that their concerns were on the list and that they were being at least considered. Nobody expects everything to be, addressed, but, it's like, okay, well, we looked at that, cannot do that one. We looked at this one, we're definitely going to incorporate that into plans. We're work in progress on this one, where there's some visibility, where people can access that. And then another one is the rate reduction for the carport shelters at Braden. It was a few months ago discussed 125 would be something that people were interested in. There are people who are coming. I know just people who are on the field say that they bump into 2 or 3 people a month who come in to check out, what the pricing is and leave because, it's not there. And 125 was something that the pilots agreed would be attractive. And it was considered, and it was then released at 200, which is not getting any level of interest at this time. So we would like to ask that 125 a month be reconsidered, because filling the carport hangars at 125 a month right now beats having them stand empty. So it can be a win-win until supply and demand makes it, logical that rates would then be increased. Also, the bathroom facilities for GA tenants and customers. I know when I sit in on these meetings, there's a lot of talk about how customer experience is so important to the LNAA, and we see that in the development plans and in what's going on, for example, at ABE, and certainly with the beautiful updates over at Queen City. But I know the Flying Club has been asking for years for like bathroom facilities, not porta-johns. And when the road widening required that the old ones be demolished, the request was put in at that time that the replacement for those be incorporated into the planning. And Darren said that was reasonable, and everybody believed that was on track. In the years since then, nothing has happened. And Bob Kutzler from the Flying Club has told me that when he asks, he's told to go talk to Rockefeller about it. But, and now this is Megan speaking, the GA tenants are customers of LNAA, and they're not getting any response from either the LNAA or from Rockefeller. And they have no standing with Rockefeller. So I'd like to put that out there as something to be, followed up on. Also at Braden, it was promised that as part of the hangar renovations before the flight school and the maintenance shop moved in, that a new bathroom would be put in. And it was, and it's beautiful, but nobody's allowed to use it except the flight school. And all the tenants and customers and the flight school have said, we'd like this to be a public bathroom with maintenance and insurance handled by LNAA, that publicly available just to the users of the airport. Not like people are going to be stopping on the roadway to come in and use the bathroom, but to the tenants. And yet, you have this beautiful bathroom and it's locked and nobody's allowed to use it. So I'd like to ask that also be reconsidered, please.
So Megan, I can speak to the two-way thing. I think that I'd like to work with the admin team here to explore the opening of the channel one way or another to increase the amount of feedback back into both the Board of Governors and to the administrative team on two-way communication. I think we've got some excellent comms people here and good listeners, so we can, I think, definitely make something like that happen. I'll leave the other items to Tom to address if possible.
Sure. I think, we do have some update on the restroom for the flying school.
Yeah, so that is happening. Rockefeller's taking care of it as they've said they would all along. I think the latest, honestly, is a permitting issue. I think that's all they're waiting for. So, which has been a bit of a challenge through all of this, I think, with the township. But it's in progress. I know it hasn't happened quickly enough for anybody, including us, but it's coming. We've seen the designs. We've approved the designs. We're just waiting, for it to actually get finished. So just ask for a little more patience, but it's coming.
Okay, so the Flying Club haven't been aware that there's been any progress or even plans. Is it possible to add that to the list of things on that visible, like status page or whatever is decided upon, that actually is, in progress or consideration?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, we've communicated with Bob, but we can certainly make sure that he's aware and that he understands it's coming. So.
Thank you. And Braden?
Yeah, in terms of the restrooms there, I think the idea was we would have a facility, as you saw from the update, the pricing for the terminal project provided public restrooms, and that was really the solution. In terms of being able to have access to members of the public, Darren,
Well, I think right now there are public restrooms in the terminal building that's there, in the temporary terminal building. Those are certainly, that building is open to the public whenever it's attended. You know, leaving the
Well,
other.
it's not available when it's not attended, for example, evenings.
Understood, and I think there's, trying to leave the other one, would be the same thing. Even if we made that open to the public, it would have to be locked when the airport was unattended. That space in there is all rented space by the flight school and by one other tenant. So if you leave those doors open, you're leaving access to everyone else's space. I mean, there's just no logistical way to make that work. So I think the only way, as it is pretty much anywhere, is when the public building is open, the public restrooms are available. I mean, understanding that's not always the best. That's why we keep the porta potty there for those after hours, you know, get it, not the best, but it's the best solution we have at this point in time.
Is it possible that in the meantime, while the terminal is not yet completed, to make that restroom available to the public and maintained by the LNAA as a temporary measure, understanding that it's only available when the flight school or maintenance shop are there to control the access?
We can talk about that, but again, we would probably want that locked whenever we were not there attending it, and that's the same thing that's happening with the public building at this point in time. We can certainly talk to the tenants to see what their interest in doing that is, but that just, to me, that opens up a lot of liability for tenant space that's there that we can't control. We have no access control. So, but we can talk about it.
Something we
When I spoke to the flight school, the owner of the flight school, he wanted that. He saw that as something that, you know, he wanted to provide.
Oh.
So he was willing to work, you know, to be responsible for the door, et cetera.
Yeah, we'll have a conversation with Newman and with the other tenant down there and see if there's a way to make it work.
Thank you.
Matt, just real quickly, this is
Brian.
I just wanted to just quickly add my voice as a second for taking a look at those shelters, you know, where they're unpaved around them and you're kind of going through the mud anyway sometimes. I do think taking a closer look at those at that $200 rate, I would second what Megan had said there. That's all.
Yeah, I mean, Todd or Darren, you want to speak to the pricing on?
Yeah, again, we took a look at this pretty hard whenever this was asked to drop down to, you know, 125. We have 4 tenants in there now paying $280 a month. So we dropped to 125. We have to rent almost all the shelters just to break even again at that point in time. That was the problem. So the second issue was the T hangers that, as you know, as Brian noted a little while ago, are not the best shape either. They're priced right around that $200 mark. So we figured, you know, sort of comparable space, comparable rates at this point in time. And the third thing about this is those moving aircraft in and out of that space, unfortunately, is a liability because of that mud and everything else. So making them really cheap and filling them up sounds great, but I guarantee you we will have issues with aircraft that we'll be paying money to repair when they're full. So you have to keep the price at a level that it covers that cost as well. I mean, they're not ideally situated without a ramp the whole way around them. So we're trying to manage sort of the risk and the, you know, and trying to make them as marketable as possible. And I said 200.
But the T hangers provide so much more protection for the airplane than the carport shelter that it doesn't make sense for them to be equivalent in price. And if you have them filled, even if you have to even take the existing 4 people down to 125, it's a temporary measure, and it means you have a lot more people using Braden and interested in Braden.
Understood, but again, there's a financial component to this. You know, we have to manage the revenue and the risk at the same time. I mean, and there's definitely risk. And I mean, I could certainly make, we don't need to do this now, but I can make a very strong argument that the T hangers don't provide a whole lot more protection than those shelters do at this point in time. That's why we're trying to keep them similarly priced. I feel if we drop those down, all we'll do is empty the T hangers and have full shelters and empty T hangers. So I don't know that that makes any sense either.
Megan, it sounds like there's probably some future discussion related to, you know, as you mentioned, that two-way channel, kind of getting some additional feedback. This is appreciated, and I think it gives the team something to think about, particularly as we prepare for the last 6 months of 2020. And I think Todd had the COVID season and the post-COVID season, and how that influences GA operations is we'll, your feedback certainly helps us understand that. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm here. There's a lot of people who can't come during business hours, so it's not just me. And people are very interested in having an interactive relationship. Not just a complaint forum, but a true interaction. So they are very interested in that two-way channel of communication in between status updates.
Yeah, and the feedback's appreciated without a doubt.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. I think we've got. Do we want to dispense with Ryan's? We've got Ryan's.
We have Ryan's capital updates. What we can do is just run his last couple of slides very quickly.
Yeah.
Yeah, when Cedric talks, I don't want to interrupt him, so.
Most people want to interrupt me to stop me from talking.
We figured out we can't stop you from talking.
Maybe the mask will work out.
Yeah, so if you just go to slide 21, please, Savette. Yeah, so all of the updates have been updated this month. They're in Novus, for everyone to kind of peruse.
Thank you.
And some of these we went through. And
I was going to say, we just saw some of this, though.
Yep.
Keep going.
So if you go up.
So right now you go up a little bit. One more, and we're there. There
you go. Perfect. So
eye test.
Yeah. Yeah, so again, this slide we've kind of been showing through all of our updates, but really, again, shows where we are. No red flags at this point. I think I mentioned last month, and I'm getting to that in a minute. A lot of these projects, as you'll see in the percentage, are pretty close to being completed. The biggest thing to draw your attention to is, as we talked about before, the runway project. Again, from a percentage completion is pretty high. From an expenditure level is low, but in the last month, actually this month, we're paying out, coordinating with Todd and the contractor, some pretty large payments that we'll get reimbursement on relatively quickly, which helps. But that number, for example, line 4, again, you can see it's a $20 million contract. We've only spent just shy of $3 million, but this month that number will jump up substantially, just given some of the pay apps that we have in the queue right now. So just wanted to draw everyone's attention to that. But then if you go to the next slide, so that scroll down. So the other thing, Tom and I are talking a little bit just to provide a little bit of background here, as I mentioned, with some of the projects closing out. Again, kind of a what's upcoming, but by the end of the year, we're anticipating 7 of those 12 projects you saw on the previous slide being completed and taken off the list. Again, no shortage of projects, but it's all ones you've seen, the master plan update, the design for the runway, the hangar. Again, we're working on starting that parking lot improvements, but that's a 60-day project. And again, some of the other ones that we've worked through. So just slightly more than half will be done by the end of the year, which is great to see. And then if you go to the next slide, Sylvette, what that does, and kind of dovetailing into some of the presentation you'll hear with Cedric, is we still have 5 of those 12 are ongoing high priority projects, and the thing we wanted to show, or at least talk through, is again some of these that are even high priority or ongoing are multi-year projects, as we've talked about. The runway is the big one. So again, as I mentioned, 2020 100% FA funded, multiple packages, but that's going to be going on until 2023, as we've discussed before. Majority of the paving was done this year, which was great, as you can see in the photo, but there's a lot of other utility work and some of the shoulder components that need to be included. Again, the connector, the security checkpoint we've talked about, partially PennDOT funded. Again, finalized and designed this year, and that should be going on until 2023 as well. And then the other ones we've talked about in the last meeting, is again, fire suppression system at Hangar 7, current contract that should be done in 2021. As a reminder, passenger boarding bridges, that's another one we've been working through, a multi-year contract with AmeriBridge, finishing in 2021. They finished, I think, about 4 bridges now, waiting on some long lead parts, but generally that's moving forward very well. And then we talked about earlier the Braden Terminal building, keeping that moving through 2021. So a less number of projects, but no shortage of projects, but also some larger scale ones, as you can see from not just the level of effort, but just from the financial side as well. And then if you go to the next slide, just briefly, and again, kind of touching on what we mentioned at GA, really kind of as a precursor to when we really talked, to Todd's point about our 6-month budgeting and the next couple of months into 2021, is, really what we talked about, even for the hangar development, some of these other pieces, is focusing on where can we get those grant funds that are available to us from the FAA, from PennDOT, whatever other sources we have, the ACE grant, for example. So really pushing forward with those. But, from the previous slide, you saw those 5 ongoing projects that are continuing. And then we're adding the 2 that we talked about in GA for Queen City that we're getting the FAA funding for. So again, we're waiting on the final grant components, but we have the second phase of the obstruction removal and then the rehab design for the runway as well, keeping that moving forward. So again, we mentioned about a 3-year construction for the 1533 rehab, funding dependent from the FAA. But then the other thing we wanted to add, just to talk through, so, as Todd alluded to, and we've talked about before, in the COVIDville, as I'll use his term, in the COVID world, we have some capital projects that we've deferred. And I think the point that he's made, and Tom and I have talked about, is they're not necessarily canceled, they're just deferred. It's still work we have to do. It's working through the timing. So I added on here, we talked about some potential 2021, in terms of where revenue falls, where some of the needs fall. As we know, equipment breaks when you don't want it to. So there's always those components of our capital program. But we had this year the landside and terminal apron paving. We've deferred until hopefully 2021. We'll see how things progress. Again, some of the CIP items with facility improvements, HVAC upgrades, requirements if things, again, break, equipment replacements beyond their useful life, those type of pieces. And then, again, as we talked about earlier, and to Brian's point, we'll definitely continue looking for that funding and applying for it. But, hangar development, depending on, one, where the funds fall in. But again, obviously, we're always willing to have the conversations with whether it's, developers or single unit entities that have that capacity in working through it as best we can. But again, it's a lot of moving parts with those components. But I think, again, just wanted to provide some of the update on, using our ability to get grants for some of these larger scale projects while continuing, every level that we can, not just at ABE, but at Queen City and Braden with some of these projects. So that's all I really had with that update, unless anyone has any questions.
And Brian, Ryan, just a little bit of context or on my ask and you guys preparing these slides. I wanted, as we're kind of going through COVIDville and we're looking at, the projects that we might not be doing, I wanted the committee to have a sense of what's not happening right now and what is going to be, what could be deferred to 2021, or other things that we may not do at all because of funding considerations. I wanted everybody to kind of keep looking further down the line than the next 6 months, particularly as Todd starts thinking about that 2021 budget. Some of these or the first half of 2021 budget, some of these considerations will be in place, and particularly with the TSA connector project, that's going to become, conceivably one of the major items on the agenda. And as we think about what we'll be discussing in August of 2021, what will we be midstream on at that point? I want to give everybody a sense of what's going to be in the pipeline for capital improvement stuff. So thank you for that update. I appreciate it.
Sure.
Any thoughts from anyone before we move into Cedric's update? Okay, that I'll hand off to Cedric, and looks like we've got some good, interesting updates on the terminal connector, or the security, whatever we're calling it. We need like a nickname for it. Yeah.
Elevated connector. And good morning to all of you. It's good to be in front of you again. I do have a quite a bit of information. We made a lot of progress since I was last in front of you at 60%, but I promise you your time is important. I'm going to try to go through it very expeditiously. Just as an overview here, we are now past 90%. We submitted that 2 weeks ago. I'm going to focus this presentation on the revisions we've made since the 60%, just to kind of highlight where the changes are and where we are, and then talk about our project issues, resolution of those, and finally like the budget confirmation, and then final steps to get the documents out on the street and advertised. From the agenda standpoint, I'm going to have some introduction slides for you. I'll briefly go through the discipline progress, really focused on the architecture and finishes, and then walk through the coordination issues, procurement, permitting, the cost estimate, and then next steps for the terminal connector. If you remember last time I was in front of you, I ended with a discussion about the parking garage, and the two of these financially could be linked, so I do have an update on the parking garage at the end of this presentation here. So again, why are we doing this? Sometimes we forget. Let me see if I can get the pointer to work there. You got technology-wise. Again, you got two escalators, one going in one direction, the other going the other direction. If either one of those fail, then obviously you've got to shut down the other one. So there's unreliable equipment. It's lived its life. We don't have a stair there at the end of the tunnel. When you look at the space right here, the first discussion with the checkpoint was it's about capacity. And this is COVIDville, so there's less people at the airport, but there's still a capacity issue. Because if you look outside, there's queuing and lanes up on the upper level. So even with the reduction in traffic, we still have the need for additional capacity. And we needed this capacity really in 2017. We needed more than 2 lanes, we needed 3 lanes. And if you look at the pictures here, essentially it's in a closed tunnel space, so the passenger experience is just not what we prefer for an airport like ABE. So again, project need, when you just look at it in a section here, so the green is departing, the orange is arriving. Again, there's just an escalator going in one direction, and so you don't have any redundancy at all. We also have crossing traffic, which in COVID world is even, it's a worse situation now that we have arriving passengers crossing with departing passengers and the lack of queuing. We know we are in COVIDville, and because we're in COVIDville, this is a U.S. crisis event. Great term, Tom. And what happens typically in these crisis events is that the aviation industry obviously takes a huge impact. There's a reduction to traffic, but it offers opportunities for us to make infrastructure improvements. We talked about the fact that bids were coming in higher. Now we have an environment where the economic conditions have created contractors are going to be aggressive towards bidding, so it offers us a potential to get lower prices of 10 to 20%. We've heard about the American Recovery Act, and talking about the CARES Act. Hopefully there's a Transportation Infrastructure Act and federal stimulus coming up here soon, where they're going to look for shovel-ready projects, and it'll give us an opportunity to achieve more grants. And finally, those investments typically pay off. As Ryan alluded to, this is a 2022-2023 construction effort. So in 2023, we all have confidence that air travel and traffic will be back to those pre-2019 levels, pre-COVIDville levels. So what we want to do is get ahead of the curve. So again, this is the proactive investment. I showed you this at the 60%, which is essentially the history of Enplanements over time, with the statement basically being, no matter what the crisis event is, 9/11, Iraq War, if again, you look at the blue line, the transition to Enplanements continues to increase and go up. And that's what we're hopeful for, even with this investment and project that we have right now. What I didn't show you is we're just focusing on the Pennsylvania Enplanements. And if you look over the past 5 and 10 years with growth, Pennsylvania has seen 12 to 11% of growth just in the state. So there's also a potential here to capture this additional market share for ABE Airport that's there. When we look at just the projections, this is from IATA, and it's a projection internationally, they see all the levels returning from 2019 pre-COVID back to 2024. Again, we're not delivering these projects in 6 months or a year. This is 2-3 years down the road, so it just makes perfect sense, even with the most conservative projections, for us to deliver. More detail to that is, again, focusing just on ABE. when you look at the table here, whether you go from 2016 in yellow, 2017 in light blue, then dark blue in 2019, you see the increase in jump in employments. You also see, frankly, pre-COVID, the fact that it was an even larger jump between January and February for 2020 prior to this happening. So the trend was there, the transition was there for this project. So just in general, as an introduction, the market share that's there, fourth largest airport in PA, ABE is with the second highest cargo weight. So revenues coming in, 4 airlines, 15 nonstop destinations. And then 2018 to 2019, you saw 15.28% growth. That was generating the need through the master plan for 3 or 4 lanes at least in capacity for the checkpoint. And then the fact that it has access to the Northeast corridor just makes the airport and its location in a perfect position for a project like this. So what are we trying to do with the project again? And I know this is a summary that I've given you, but I'd like to keep the reminder in. We want to rise to that occasion, resolve the equipment reliability issue we talked about with the escalators, the elevators, the lack of stair. Increase the terminal checkpoint capacity both through the number of lanes and then also the size and equipment and technology that's in there. Because right now the tunnel is too small to get the latest generation of TSA equipment. We want to satisfy all current TSA standards, so it's not only just an improvement and enhancement for passengers, it's also a security-related improvement. And finally, the level of service. Obviously, walking through a tunnel that's so many years old in post-COVID space versus walking above ground in an open space, an elevated connector is going to give you a higher level of passenger service. Just very quickly with this, there isn't a level 0, level 1, 2, and 3. 1 being the tunnel, 2 being the checkpoint, 3 being the Wiley concourse. What we have resolved since 60%, the restrooms. So terminal level 2, the restroom right outside this door is experiencing some enhancements, and I'll show you those in a second. We're building a new substation. I'll show you where that is. The micro piles are really about mitigation of sinkholes and reduction of risk and costs. We've executed the program management team really about reducing risk and schedule and implementing lessons learned and overseeing a project of this magnitude. Ryan talked about LEED. Important to mention, with LEED, there's only 2 recipients, so we think that's a good thing to go LEED gold. We are still in the process of adding and investigating COVID-19 improvements. I'm going to talk about a couple of them there, but we've included some contingency for that in the project itself. And then finally, the emergency generator to support the systems that are going to be in this connector and in the checkpoint, so that we do have a tertiary form of backup power. And then, how can we make money using the space with digital advertising and also showcase the work of the local artists that are in this area? I'll talk a little bit about that as well. So, when we move the architecture, the current concept is still primarily the same as you saw at 60%. One highlight to note, because there are pictures that float out there showing the escalators separated. The escalators are together with a stair, and then there's 2 elevators. So that is still implemented and consistent here. When we begin and look at the space right outside this door, we begin to see opportunities. The first thing you'll see, restrooms in close proximity, and then opportunities for artwork right adjacent to the boardroom that we plan to work with the community on. Continuing through the space, again, compare that to what you saw with the tunnel, open, high ceilings, post-COVID world. Post-COVIDville is really about confidence of the traveler. And there's a tremendous amount of confidence when you compare that to the existing tunnel. The 4 lanes, these are the finishes, particularly with the materials and some of the colors that will be implemented as part of the project. The finished board is actually right in this boardroom right behind you. We're working with the directors and the airport to finalize that. The most important piece of that is finalizing the material. The colors may come at a later date, as long as we have that in the pricing.
It's not going to be all white like this?
Right now, yes, that is the color
Okay.
seeing the floor.
It looks so ethereal.
Well, that was when we'll get to it in the end, but both mixing digital advertising and the local working with Arts Quest to integrate public art into the design will take away some of that stark look.
Oh, I don't think it looks bad.
Yeah.
At all. I like it.
Yeah, I think it's important to keep, to Cedric's point, to keep that clean, open design.
Yeah.
But I think, there's a lot of opportunity to enhance the space too. So certainly, we're sensitive to the balance and maintaining the ease and convenience, that kind of comfortable, relaxed, space.
So remembering the focus as well for the project, this is a checkpoint expansion. So we've had 7 meetings with TSA, both national and local, focusing on the purchase of the equipment, then whether it be CT equipment or whether it be the automatic screening lanes, which is non-staff. The space accommodates both technologies in 4 lanes and could have processing up to 180 people per hour per lane versus the 150 that is in with the existing equipment and existing tunnel now. When we enlarge the back of house space, again, TSA local, moving all of their support staff and their functional space right behind the checkpoint, including a communications room for the airport and a new substation for the space in support of that. When we work our way up to the elevated connector, again, the focus there is this is an elevated space that still allows for ground service equipment to go underneath, and then there's a vertical circulation and core. Now we're adding 2 more elevators, 2 more escalators going in the same direction, improving on the reliability. Again, visually, as you continue to see, this is the ceiling and the space and the lighting that is included in working towards 90% and 100% documents. We are still going to have a final, almost a finishes confirmation meeting with the airport for all of the visuals and looks inside the space, but we've made a lot of progress there. You didn't see this shot at the 60%. What it shows is once you're at the top of the escalator, there's also the elevator core, and that shows a cladding for the elevator that's proposed, and then opportunities for space, informational space, or digital advertising there as well. But this shot kind of looks back towards the checkpoint. In the tunnel, so the tunnel, keep in mind, we have a 30-foot opening here that ties into the existing tunnel and the vertical circulation core from Wiley Concourse for arriving passengers to come down through what would be a secure exit portal. It includes an access corridor for airport personnel to be able to get back into the secure space. Once you see that visually, there's the escalators. Again, we've added a stair, and we have some opportunities for advertisement or financing for the space. You didn't see this at 60% as well. This is the next generation of that tunnel space when you come down. We talked about the potential for digital advertising, but now we've brought in the same type of carpet into the tunnel space and then a 4-foot wainscoting there that's there to not show the weathering or damage that occurs over a long period of time. When you continue to walk down that tunnel space, although the lighting in the tunnel is essentially the same, minus the linear lights, you see the space is completely different in its look compared to what it is today. And we're working now with the airport to finalize that. This is really just shown as an example of some opportunities for either art, advertisement, digital displays, etc., for whatever the airport and the board desires. Continuing down that space, you see in the end, you have a linear direction right towards the exit portals. So the secure exit portals there without staffing, and I'll talk a little bit about that when I get into the details of the disciplines. A section here to essentially just show you what's there right now between the main terminal and Wiley Concourse, and then the expansion of the space, and then note the tunnel underneath with the escalators. Now we've got linear direction for departing passengers to stay and come up the elevated connector, and then just an escalator down to the tunnel for arriving passengers. I mentioned the materials, and the finished board is here in the boardroom. This is really focused on the checkpoint and the concourses and the color scheme for both the terrazzo within the bridge and the restrooms, and also the carpets that's there. Again, the key thing is the material. On the right side, you see the elevator cladding and the woven material that would be in the elevator or proposed for the elevator right now with that wall system. So all of those are available here for you and the look. When we talk about the restrooms, again, the focus was on the main terminal restroom, level 2, although all of the restrooms have been identified for an upgrade. That's what's included in the package right now. You walk right outside this door, you'll see the existing layout and space and the narrower hallways. We're proposing to widen those out, although the fixture count will be the same and really would meet the recommendations from ACRP for fixtures for the type of, the quantity of traffic that's here. But you'll have essentially an upgraded space. You have easy wayfinding to the restroom now to know that it's there. And then once you enter inside, the color scheme that exists there, a focus, not necessarily on antimicrobial, but bacterial prevention, a lot less joints, okay, and then contactless use. So as far as the, you know, your point of touch in the bathroom is minimized with the finishes that are selected here. This shows one of the color schemes for the partitions inside and just gives you a view of the overall feel of the restroom itself. When we talk about the materials in the restroom and the support spaces, so on the left side there, focusing again on tile and impact-resistant panels that allow for easy cleaning and long-term use without a whole lot of maintenance. On the right side there, you see the support spaces behind that we've shown the TSA. So we mentioned the color, and then we talked about the advertising and art. So when you see, here's proposals for how the space could be used for digital advertising, artwork, etc. And in addition to that, elevator cladding, although not shown, some opportunities there for as you come up the escalator to look and see advertisements that go along with that. Once you're up in the elevated connector, a combination of either static advertisement or a digital advertisement, opportunities there right and left. I kind of love this pointer here, right and left. And then once you're through the space, we have a combination of FIDs for directional display, artwork, and art opportunities to bring in the local art. To take a break again to show you just the spatial view for the ABE traveler in 2023, post-COVID versus what they're doing today. It's hard to believe that you wouldn't have a higher level of confidence as a traveler and give us a better opportunity to capture the market share that was demonstrated to exist prior to COVID. Inside the space, it opens up wider. This gives you a visual display. And note that the digital advertisement was shown in the recomposure area on the other side of the checkpoint. So obviously when you're going through the checkpoint, you're focused on getting through the checkpoint. Now you're through the checkpoint, hey, there's an opportunity for advertisement either on the escalators going up or also on the side. And then this also is updated with all of the finishes on how the floor would look, the cladding on the stainless steel on the columns. Doesn't have the elevator cladding yet, but it will. So up the 2 escalators, and then over the elevated connector. And this will ultimately be an animation that can probably be looped outside here at the terminal during the construction effort. Same thing with arriving. This doesn't have the update on the tunnel yet, but as you come down, if you remember the visual I just showed you, now the tunnel has also digital display, easy wayfinding. Everything is intuitive for the passenger here at ABE. The exterior, which you've seen, there's been some updates to the exterior, but even on the apron side, you've got an improvement visually on what's there for the terminal facility. Looks like an up-to-date and new facility. Same thing on the east side. Now, some of the exciting parts that I will go through very quickly. So on the discipline side, the steel development is all there, essentially. The key thing here is that At the tunnel face, there is a 30-foot opening for vertical circulation, and we found a way to work around the existing utilities that exist there. Sinkholes, I mentioned this when we were doing the runway project. The environment here is a sinkhole environment. We've identified the historic sinkholes, and we're attempting to mitigate it both with contingency dollars in the project, but also the use of micropiles, which essentially can advance through the sinkholes. So they've been approved. We've implemented those into the foundation design on the geotechnical side. Just real briefly with the grading, important part is there has been some infiltration of really surface water into the tunnel, the existing tunnel today.
That's putting it mildly, some.
The grading and pavement limits really push all of the drainage away from the facility, and we put in new inlets, so now you don't necessarily have the water at the surface over the tunnel, causing the concerns with drainage with the existing tunnel. This is just I mentioned the new substation and feeder. Previously, we were going to run that along the connector itself. Now that feeder is actually running from the old tower building and then tying back into one of the existing substations and then the new substation notice in the connector. So really separated from the overall level of construction implementation. We mentioned the emergency generator. So now, what is going to be on that generator is tertiary power. At least one elevator and escalator will still function based on emergency generator. 2 of the checkpoint lanes, and then the TSA support space behind is still going to be functioning with the emergency generator. And finally, the security and fire gates and the toilet rooms will all still function and work with the new restroom. I think that's an important thing to mention, even if you lose the redundancy of power there at the airport.
Currently, when we are on emergency power, we're essentially limited lighting, emergency lighting. Everything else is offline.
That's right.
How often does that happen?
We're fortunate in a sense that we have a dual power feed from PPL that goes back a long time.
World War II.
Yeah. So that doesn't really happen in businesses today anymore. So you're really relying on generator. Many times it's always been the case, even for hurricanes, and here we go, that we may lose a line, but we don't lose both. So that we've been fortunate, again, because of the very limited generator capacity we have, but we wanted to build that in as part of the project to at least have that redundancy.
So flip flow triple, you may have flown in and out of an airport with a secure exit portal. They have many options. This is the one we are proposing and that TSA has essentially accepted. It's called a flip flow triple. Unmanned, it allows about 500 passengers an hour per unit. We were proposing 2 units. So upstairs, you got about 180 per lane per hour. Downstairs, you got 500 without anyone there per hour that can come out. The unrestricted flow that you would have if you had a guard is up to 3,600 passengers. So essentially 2 lanes provide you with the capacity needed for the airport for a long time. There's up to 4 lanes could fit into the existing tunnel space as well. So there's a capability to expand future there in the existing tunnel. But this is a change from the last secure exit portal that we had proposed. HVAC, the key thing there in this post-COVID world is how often are we exchanging the air, moving air through and in and out, so it's not stagnant in the space. Basically, in the economic mode, the air changes is about 1 per 90 minutes. So every hour and a half, all of the air inside that big wide space is being exchanged out for outside air in condition. When it's maxed out, it's every 20 minutes. So the question pops in all of our heads in today's world is how do we increase the air purification in the space and have confidence that there's a metric to measure that by. So what we are evaluating is the life air system. So the life air system essentially is used for in vitro in the medical world for purifying air. They're a locally based firm. They essentially tie in a kill unit from the air handler and distribute that air. So the air is essentially going to be not only conditioned, but then treated for any viral component that could be in the air and then distributed out into the space. A lot of the coordination that's occurred with them is, does the energy performance associated with that unit put the lead gold in jeopardy? Right now that answer is no, because there's such a low voltage drop on it, we can still maintain the lead goal. And there's the potential for long-term monitoring, really a monitoring and maintenance plan, but a monitoring plan to show that they are treating and improving the air quality in the space. So over a long-term period, I think there's some benefits to that. If it's COVID-19 or COVID-20, we are actually monitoring and treating this space for the long term. Real briefly on the phasing, I think just the key here, if you can see the green line is going to be a temporary security identification display fence. So essentially, this whole area will be non-badged, which is going to reduce the pricing from the contractor. So that whole area is basically taken as a first phase, with the focus being on utilities and the vertical circulation corridor. We want to try to open that early. The beauty of the phasing in general is the existing tunnel space and the operation can all still continue while construction is going above ground because it's a new space. The second phase takes the entire area and focuses on the checkpoint and the elevated connector. And then the third phase is the final transition, because now we've got the checkpoint open to tunnel space and then putting in the roadway. So just real briefly, the phases are relatively simple. So those are the disciplines. When we move to the coordination issues that are left, I mentioned COVID-19, the decision on Life Air is pending. They have worked the calculations for integration in with the HVAC system. They're now putting together the final cost impacts associated with that in the 5-year plan. TSA National and Local, we're on meeting number 8 with them. And again, we will be meeting with them again and again to confirm delivery of equipment and then how they're measuring the staffing needs in the checkpoint. So one is, we have 4 lanes. Are we getting 4 lanes worth of equipment, and are they going to staff it that way for the future? And that's an ongoing conversation. The construction schedule and inspection requirements. We know this is 2 years of construction, but what are the inspection needs associated with the duration of construction as they progress through? Permits is always an issue from a timing standpoint. We've had a preliminary meeting with the township. We've already delivered on NIFD, so we're still moving that piece forward. I talked a lot about the finishes and approval of the finishes because I know there's a lot of opinions and discussion with regards to the finishes. The key is that we get the materials selected so that the color scheme, et cetera, the dollars are in the contract when we bid it. And then coming up Tuesday, I counted the meetings since we met with you last. We've had 26 separate coordination meetings and with different stakeholders. Our final stakeholder meeting is on Tuesday to move towards 100%. Just briefly on the schedule, advertisement, we're targeting September the 9th. So we're final documents then and a pre-bid meeting September the 16th with a bids in hand by the end of October so we can make the November board meeting. With that in mind, construction would start at the beginning of 2021. This, as a reminder, is not just due to the grants, but just in general, is a multi-prime contract. So we've got a general contractor, mechanical, electrical, and plumbing. We have gone through extensive revisions on the front end and general information to marry the responsibilities of these contractors to meet both the grant requirements, because there's a lot of issues with the grant, but also for the schedule and responsibility on costs related to scope of work. As you can see, it's a comprehensive scope of work. This at the bottom there is just a summary there of the dates. Permitting schedule. So we're targeting, we have now done a pre-application meeting with the township, went across the street and met with them. We're targeting October 27th for NIFD's approval, and then December 18th for the record land development plan to make sure all the permitting is in place prior to construction. I know you all at the board have heard a lot of previous projects, I don't want to call it lessons learned, but issues. And what we're trying to do is make sure that we consolidate all of those and have some coordination metrics associated with the contract here to make sure these things, we at least mitigate the potential of them happening. This is a listing of them. The general conditions and contract have been refined. The general conditions is really being refined right now for multi-prime. We're making the program manager responsible ultimately for the schedule and coordination between all the multi-primes and contractually making the contractors work with them. Permitting, I just mentioned, is not just our responsibility, it's also the contractor's responsibility to follow through on the permitting component. We've integrated that into the documents. Long lead items could be an issue here, both owner furnished long lead items and contractor furnished long lead items, so we have a list of that. We know the pavement issues that have occurred here. We got quality assurance in place for that. The utility relocations and the inspections associated with that are also listed both in the documents and the drawings and the specifications to mitigate that piece. Vendor coordination, when are we going to have the vendors come out and who's responsible for that is identified now in the document. And then the last couple here, liquidated damages. We've done a identification of milestones to both facilitate the schedule but also incorporated liquidated damages in what validates the damage, what is the impact to the airport in the documents and with the airport, so there's some backing for that. And then subcontractor requirements, the waivers, and then finally contingency management. We have a contingency in the contract, but typically in these vertical projects, you get lump sum pricing. So how are we going to manage the contingency? Essentially, we're requiring the contractor to provide a schedule of values. Once you put the bid in, tell me how you broke down the cost. So that gives us a better position to estimate impacts to the project and then negotiate with the contractor on the back. The milestones themselves, essentially just focusing on the primary ones in bold are the ones with liquidated damages, the vertical circulation core I mentioned, TSA and being prepared for them, final connector beneficial occupancy, and then micropile because that affects the foundation. So there's this whole list in the contract, but the LDs will be associated with those four primary. Construction strategy. We mentioned the program management implementation and the grant requirements that we have some continuity with the team for program management, but we are also implementing an inspection staff that will be managed by the program manager that is locally based and will support the construction effort through the schedule. And we've developed a schedule that we're including in the contract documents as a basis for bid. So a contractor can come back and say, yeah, well, I'm going to do it this way. You're bidding on it this way, and you need to have the resources to do that. I mentioned the milestones in the front end and inspection requirements. Partnering is about risk mitigation. Many airports today utilize partnering, and what that is basically bringing executive staff from all of the stakeholders, whether it be the airport, the multi-primes, the design team, and the program management team to the table, usually monthly, to elevate issues that are concerned that cause cost and schedule impacts, and then make sure they're resolved at an executive level too. So we're in the process of implementing the partnering component. And finally, construction administration, which is on the design side and making sure the design team is involved, and then scope coordination items. That's all part of our strategy right now. Just to highlight kind of that org chart, when you see that, you kind of have the program manager here at the top, the stakeholders, obviously the airport's at the top, but the other stakeholders that are involved, and the program manager is responsible for updating of that. Partnering is part of it. And then the construction team is the construction manager and inspection staff. Then you have the contractor itself, the multi-primes, and then the administration side is the design team, essentially still being involved with resolution of issues during construction. So this is kind of the org, we're still populating part of this org chart, but this is the org chart towards execution. On the cost side, and key point here, these are all pre-COVID costs. The estimate was done kind of prior and based on previous pricing. I mentioned all of the owner-directed items here in the list. Essentially, they subtotal to about $5 million, and the contingency is still in here, about 1.5. So when you incorporate that, the range of costs, again, we're going to be bidding this project is somewhere from a construction standpoint of 24 to 28 million. We've got $1 million in there for COVID-19 improvements. We've got 1.5 million being provided by TSA, and then we have the soft costs that are left over for execution of the project for total programmatic costs somewhere between 32 and 35, incorporative of everything to deliver this. The schedule itself, I mentioned we're about a little bit less than 2.5 years out right now. We have the advertisement date, the bid opening, and then 2 years of construction delivery for 2023. When we break down the potential funding for that dollar figure, we mentioned TSA at $1.5 million. We have the ACE grant at $820K. 2 state grants that are allocated not necessarily awarded yet, but allocated between 1.5 and 2 million for 3.5 million. And then the RCAP state grant, which is about 12.5 million, for a total of 18.3 million, really in grants and funding, other funding for the program. We talked a little bit about a potential stimulus. Typically, stimulus projects that come federally are looking, in this situation, are looking to create jobs immediately. So they want shovel-ready projects, which this would fall into that category as a shovel-ready project. Frankly, with COVID-19 related improvements, because they're probably going to put some funding in and requirements for things of that nature. And so our financing load is somewhere between 15 and 20 million that we're looking for to complete the program costs.
How many jobs would this create?
So the number we have is approximately, during construction, 75. And that's that's full-time positions. So you got contractor, you got design team, you got program management team.
Right.
And then if you add in post connector project, you got TSA staff, and then you got airport staff. So if it's a 20-year program, that number's double that, goes up. Because it's servicing you over 20 years. But just purely during the construction period, about 75.
And those 70, I mean, from the economic development perspective, those 75 jobs could be filled by nobody from Lehigh or Northampton County, unfortunately, depending on who you contract with.
Who the contractor is.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is, that's, I know, I'm pointing out, it's just to keep that in mind. When it sounds like 75 jobs, it would probably raise the cost of the project, but there are ways to ensure that those jobs are Lehigh Northampton County jobs.
Yes.
And that's where the Life Air thing actually, like Life Air is
Yep.
a local women-owned business, cool entrepreneurial story. There's multipliers on job creation with that type of purchase.
But the airport doesn't have an RCO or anything like that, do they? And for the post-construction, how many jobs would that be?
So
Those are more permanent jobs, right?
those are more permanent jobs. We estimated actually for the airport, 20 years of growth, you had about 60 jobs being created at that level of growth. And then on the TSA side, you have four lanes. You have 4 lanes. There's, and support staff from that standpoint, 10 to 15 jobs. The one other thing to mention there too, the RCAP grant has some requirements, obviously the Pennsylvania wage rates, and also the fact that we have to solicit at least 3 bidders. We don't necessarily have to have responses from 3 bidders, but we have to solicit. We have actually had the contractor outreach, which I think that attendee list was about 15 contractors. So I think we have proof of that for the grant itself. So next steps, I tried to go through this as quickly as I could. I know there's a lot of slides. So we have Tuesday, August 25th is the director's meeting. We're going to validate the costs and the schedule. We get bids in hand, and we can look at opportunities for value engineering based on the schedule of values. Get back. We're initiating the inspection and scoping and partnering that needs to happen for this. We're going to have obviously 2 or 3 more meetings with TSA, and then with that director's meeting, try to make a decision on the Life Air integration that might equate to a 5th multi-prime scenario if we enter in with Life Air to install their proprietary equipment. And then finally resolve all of the final comments. Now, the hourly garage, any questions related to the connector? Any other questions?
Anybody have any questions on the call? Is there anybody left on the call? I know we've gone long.
Yeah, this will be very quick. We essentially showed last time that Enplanements versus parking demand. We had a shutdown here for COVID, and then we're hoping for a recovery. So when we put numbers to that right now, Enplanements are at 434,000. I get this. Their average growth was 8% over the last 5 years. The 2018-2019 growth was 15.28%, which meant short-term parking was 80% used, peak was 100. Long-term parking was 70% used, but 100% in long-term as well, which meant basically based on your average use in 3 years, the parking you have would be maxed out, and you'd be at overflow parking. I showed you a little graphic before. When I put a metric to this, we had the numbers. These are based on the actual numbers. From 2018, 2019, you had $635,000 additional revenue. On top of that, if you look at the trajectory from 2020, it was exceeding 2019 prior to COVID. So these are real numbers in parking revenue. Also, from a percentage standpoint, 12.77% versus 15% Enplanements. So you still had 13, even prior to COVID, prior to still with use of Uber, et cetera, you had 13% increase in revenue generation from parking versus 15% growth from Enplanements. So the parking was still on a trajectory, even in 2020, based on the real numbers, was still right on trajectory with the rest. And note the number, almost $5.5 million a year in revenue. When we talk about per transaction, $35 per day, or per transaction, I'm sorry, $35 per transaction. So if you remember those numbers, and then you couple the fact that you have 1.1 million square feet of space in close proximity of the terminal, which is primarily used for either short-term, long-term parking, rental car pickup or return, economy parking, and then the vaunted overflow parking out here where you have a shuttle. Is that the convenience that we want to provide to the customer, and is that maxing out the revenue that can be generated from parking? So again, if we rise to the occasion, the number one goal there is how do we increase revenue generation, increase our capacity, shorten the walking distance, and then enhance the customer experience through weather-protected parking, intuitive wayfinding, and security. I mentioned the matrix that we put together for locations. We focused on the employee lot as the highest score from a matrix standpoint. So you see the employee lot location right there. When you compare the walk, which is about a quarter of a mile at long term, and again, you're 80% used right now, so most people are parking out here at that point, versus 600 feet from the employee lot, you have a much shorter distance. And then we begin to look at that employee lot location, match it up with the terminal connector, and you begin to see how the airport now is in a unique position to capture Pennsylvania's market share. You see it from the roadway, it gives you intuitive wayfinding. You see it from just the frontage of the terminal, and you see what the space now looks like, even with the connector. And the fact that you've preserved all of the short-term parking that is located while you've constructed this garage. So that revenue stream of $5.5 million, you're still getting that revenue stream based on the existing operation. And then you ask yourself, outside of that $5 million, what's the cost of doing nothing? If the master plan showed about 3.5% growth, I showed you the last 2 years, 2018, 2019, you're about 15%. So we used 4%, with an existing parking rate, $35 per day, at 60% occupancy. These are the numbers that generate over 5, 10, 15, and 20 years. You incorporate a PFC, $4.50 per passenger, assume 2 per car. The concessions is $1 per person. That's it. And you're talking $216 million over 20 years in additional revenue generated with the coupling of the garage and the connector. Those numbers grow. The investment of the garage, schedule-wise, is 4 years. The design's about 1.5 because you got to plan, program, investigate, and deliver on an advertisement. And then we have a programmatic cost based on that employee lot location with 1,080 spots of $44 million. So the charge here is to try to initiate the programming, planning, and design, which is typically about 10% of that, or $5 million. So what is that investment versus the revenue generation? Again, looking at 20 years. So you open the garage right now in 2024, which is coincidentally when 2019 levels are conservatively supposed to be back. And you talk about a $44 million investment versus $6.2 million of revenue if we assume the 60% usage, which means 7 years to cover that initial investment. For the remaining 13 years, you up the occupancy to 75% because the airport has grown at $35 a day again, which is what you're getting per transaction today. It generates about $10.3 million a year or $134 million in net revenue over 13 years for the airport. So that's what's kind of generating that number. Payoff in 7 years and then revenue generation after that. The metric for the terminal connector is not an easy metric because it's about processing lanes, but without it, you don't really have the parking demand because if there's a 40-minute wait when you get in line, there's no real reason to go to ABE and park. So the connector is still a critical component in the traffic growth and market share capture here at ABE. But then you add in the revenue from the parking garage, as I showed you, 141 million over 20 years, the Enplanements and the taxes at 60 million, the concessions at 13.5 million, and conservatively advertising in that space at 10 million over 20 years. And you pay all the connector and the garage essentially in 10 years after you've opened the facility up, and then you have still revenue generation based on those numbers of about $11.2 million a year. I clarified, I was saying this very quickly for time, but I clarified the numbers are based on conservative growth, 4% growth, 60% use. If we bump those numbers and use the trends that we've seen, they go higher. So what is the ask financially for the airport? It's the terminal connector. I mentioned the financing potentially at 20 million, and then it's the planning and design first of the garage at 5 million, with the construction cost somewhere at about 40. So in 2021, 2022, about 25 million to initiate the design. Because again, the garage doesn't just pop up. It takes, a year and a half, and then we got to put it on the street, and then we got to build it. And then the second piece of that is the 40 million in construction dollars to actually build the garage for an overall ask of $65 million for both. I mentioned the target dollar generation at 216 million versus the program investment of 65 million for the 20-year planning period. So the next steps there, thanks for listening to me, but next steps there, obviously advertise the connector and get pricing for that and put us in position. Secure the state grants that are allocated towards us in the RCAP. Secure the financing that's needed on back end for construction of the connector and design of the garage, and then initiate that bidding process and then start the planning and design of the new garage. I apologize for the duration. It was a lot of information. I was just trying to get as quick as I could.
That's a lot to take in.
It is.
Any thoughts or feedback from the folks on the Zoom? I'll turn it over to anybody who wants to weigh in. And just a heads up, I think when we do wrap up here, we'll have a relatively quick executive committee meeting, and we may hold any updates for our board meeting on Tuesday, just in the interest of time.
This is John Hayes. Just a couple of comments. Number one, a lot of this ties back into timing. It's based on anticipation of coming out of COVID, people going back to traveling, et cetera, et cetera. A lot of that's got to play out. We'll see how quickly people come out. But more importantly, and this is something, I don't know if Glenn Geisinger is still around or not. Glenn had mentioned months ago in regard to the purported advent of driverless vehicles. Right now, some of that works, some of that doesn't work. If that's a legit technology in a 5 to 10 year time frame, our parking requirements could go through the floor as opposed to through the roof. People could simply have their cars go home and then come back to pick us up. How does that factor into, that type of technology factor into what we're thinking about here in regard to building a deck as opposed to buying a piece of property, establishing a strong shuttle system, establishing covered waiting areas, things of that nature, that if that happens and parking demand drops, we then have an asset we can sell as opposed to a monolith that stands next to our terminal that would be half empty.
Yep, I think those are good comments, John. And that was one of the things that I'm thinking through is we have a lot projected out in the future, and we could be, cutting the ribbon on an obsolete item 4 or 5 years from now, either because traffic doesn't return like we expect it to, or technologies replace the need for parking. There is I think we have a lot as a board of governors to chew on with regards to the need for that type of thing, and appreciating that if we follow trend, there's a real need for it, but trend, like Todd doesn't even want to do a 1 year budget at this point. We're not sure what we can really guess about the future.
There, I would, if I could just offer a comment, I would just compare an elevated consolidated parking component to a distributed one-level parking of 1.1 million square feet around the terminal itself. So even if there was a lowered use of parking, you're still consolidating that parking in close proximity to the terminal. And then it allows you, if that's the case, it allows you to use the surface parking for potential
Other uses.
that's in close proximity to the terminal. So right now, you've got a half mile walk outside in the weather and elements with the type of passenger that's here versus placing that passenger, particularly once they get used to doing it, right next to the terminal.
Yeah. The other thing, John, and you're a lifelong Lehigh Valley resident, but my observation as somebody who's only been here for about 20 years is that the trends that may be present nationwide or globally take a little while to catch on here. So and I'm trying to be gentle, but if driverless technologies are developed in the next 5 years, it might be a little while before they really take hold locally.
You're absolutely right.
Driverless technologies are developed.
Oh, driverless.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's one thing. Are you gonna put charging stations in and stuff like that?
Well, and you mentioned the jobs thing, and again, I was listening to something this morning, and I know Tara's got an election in the next 75 days. There's another big election in 75 days, and depending on what administration we see, there may be, back to the lead side of this, and the terminal connector, and the parking garage as well, there may be federal investments made in, the types of green technologies that we're exploring here. So
I agree.
it's a lot to digest. The terminal connector part of it alone is a lot to digest, and then thinking through a garage component, and we really we're taking whichever direction you take, it's a bit of a risk, right?
But the terminal expansion, you kind of have to do that.
Right.
Don't you?
Well, we're banking on people continuing to fly, right, with the terminal expansion, and Lehigh Valley seeing increased wealth, and the increased wealth, comes down to or results in increased travel. Travel is still something that is relatively, the province of the rich. But when you look at our regional prosperity increasing, that results in more activity. When we're looking at capturing more of the Pennsylvania traffic because of Newark or Philly not doing so well, there's a lot of case to be made for making those investments. The big one that kind of after the comma of and also a parking garage, that's where there's I think John's questions come into play, and it's got a bigger price tag too.
Right.
It does.
But we did get an $820,000 grant for this, right?
That's for the terminal connector.
For the
For the terminal connection. So if we delayed this, what would happen to that grant? When does that expire? When would we have to use it? How long?
Yeah, the schedule for the grant actually coincides well with the project because it takes us into, I want to say, June, July timeframe of 2023, correct?
Oh.
And so here's the catch, though, is that gives us a series of months of monitoring that facility to confirm that the project performed in the way that it was designed.
Mhm.
So if we don't have a project online by about the schedule we're looking at, which is very early 2023, then we run the risk of not being able to accept the grant because we don't have sufficient time to actually do the monitoring portion and performance to confirm that the grant actually did what it was supposed to do.
So what is that window of time that we have to actually utilize? We have to implement this project so that we can utilize that grant. Would it be 2021, 2022?
We'll need 2021 to start implementing this project in order to make the schedule work on the back end.
We're talking about the connector now.
Yeah.
For the
We're talking
connector.
about the connector.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that changes the process a little bit in terms of when we have to start moving forward.
Yeah, so the idea, and Cedric had some of the information, but the idea would be to get the project wrapped up and finalized so we can get it out to bid, open up bids at the end of October, evaluate, his team, can evaluate all the bids and multi-primes, bring back a recommendation at the end of November for board consideration, and then taking all of that into account, moving all of that forward for a planned construction start in January.
So January of 2021? So then construction would be in 2022?
2021,
2022. But I mean, it would end in like somewhere before 2022.
Beginning 2023.
Yeah, it's a
2
Oh,
years.
wow, 2 years
Yeah,
construction.
2 years construction.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah, it's a long,
So,
long project.
We've got the foundation, micropiles to put in, and then the shell space, and then fit out of the shell space.
so it doesn't sound like we have a whole lot of time to evaluate, like, what the political or scene will actually be.
Well, for the garage. So remember, there's two separate pieces here.
So they're not necessarily.
What we can do, yeah.
Divide them.
Cedric's putting this garage concept out there for us to consider, but we could just say, we're down the road with the terminal connector, and we think that robots are gonna start driving us around, and passenger traffic might not hit the levels that we expect, and a garage would be egg on our face if we tried to open it in 2024.
Understood.
That's like a possible outcome, that we could say, like, forget a garage for reasons X, Y, and Z.
Right.
But that's something we don't, we have a little bit of time to evaluate, but I think Seth's point is, you don't have forever, right? You can't decide you want to build a garage in 2023 and then start it in 2022.
Yeah, because the issue there is it's really 4 years to deliver it. So let's say for the next 4 or 5 years, parking's going, and oh man, everyone's parking, everyone's driving. Let's build a garage. Then you got 3 or 4 more years after that, because you still got to deliver the garage.
Right.
So if you, what you can, and that's where part of the pitch was, if we push for the planning and design of the garage, you can decide that that's 2 more years down the road.
Right.
And you have that in place, then you can make a decision too on whether you want to, when you want to trigger, if, you need to trigger a construction of a garage.
The construction window is shorter than 2 years.
Shorter. The construction window is 2 years, so now you've reduced the window time because you've done all the other legwork.
But we're just hedging our bets on what parking will be in the future.
We have, the nice thing, so as you can appreciate, a lot can happen in 75 days before an election. A lot can happen in 2 months. There's going to be a point at which we'd have to come to a decision on whether we want to build a garage or not.
Yeah.
It ain't tomorrow, it ain't Tuesday. I don't know when it is exactly, but we've got a lot more data to collect. So when we look at those trends, employment trends, if we start to see some recovery, then maybe we start to feel better about a garage. But then we also think about, what Uber and Lyft are doing in California with their drivers, right? We start to think about how Waymo and Google are doing on the development of driverless technologies.
Right.
We start to think about, how relative air traffic in Philly is doing versus here. Like, there's a lot of other considerations that we have some more time to evaluate data on the need to do a garage. I don't think anybody's ready to, we can keep evaluating it, but
Too many variables if we.
there's a lot of
One
variables.
of the things is we really wanted to kind of look at the whole picture, even though we knew it was 2 separate pieces, because we don't like surprises. So,
Sure.
hey, we definitely we're talking about the terminal. What's kind of right behind that potentially? We didn't want to say, all right, let's do the terminal. By the way, maybe we might want to do a garage.
Right.
Let's kind of think about them 1 and 1A as we're kind of going on the process, as opposed to waiting and saying, yeah, man, we should do a garage now.
And the garage is an easy financial metric to understand because a ticket generates revenue. The checkpoint's a little bit more difficult because it's about people going through. But if you marry the two, from a financial generation standpoint, a garage generates revenue. Now, you're right, Uber, Lyft, but those numbers were with Uber, Lyft going full blast. It still was a 12.7.
We have no idea what that's going to be.
Well, I mean, the thing is, like, I believe in markets. I know that you build a terminal connector, passenger traffic's to the roof. Let's say in a world we say, forget it, we're not going to build a garage, and there's a crying need for parking to satisfy the needs of the passengers. we can capture some of it, but the rest of the world captures some of it too. So if we choose to not build a garage, it doesn't necessarily mean that we sink the future of the airport forever. I think presenting a scenario in which there's a revenue opportunity for us, but we have to do the full vetting of that model before we can make any kind of go forward statements.
But in the one scenario, the revenue goes to the airport, and the other scenario,
It doesn't.
the revenue goes outside the airport.
Exactly.
So you just have to, decide what our capacity is to be able to build it.
Right.
And again, it's, we talk about ease and convenience, so there's elements of looking at how our facilities compare to our, compare airports in proximity.
Yep.
Where are our customers gonna go if they don't go here? And what are the facilities and services available there versus here?
Yeah. The timing's good though. I mean, to me, it's good to be able to talk about this stuff now, and hopefully the picture gets clearer over the next few months, whether it's on the funding side or the activity side or whatever it is. Like right now, everything's murky.
Yeah. You're right.
The only thing we know right now is that we're moving down the road on the terminal connector, and we have a good update to consider with that.
Sorry about the length of time. It's
No,
just
no,
a lot of information.
Not a problem.
Do you any other feedback from the call participants? We don't have any more business to address on this committee, so if it's okay, I know we've got John from the executive committee, we've got Brian. I'll probably just call for a motion to adjourn this meeting, roll right into exec, and try to move quickly through the action items in exec. Is that okay with you and Brian, John? Brian?
Yep, it's okay by me.
All right.
So moved.
All right, Brian moves to adjourn this meeting.
Second.
Thank you. That closes the meeting of the business committee. Thank you, Cedric. Appreciate it. I will welcome everyone to join us for the executive committee meeting now. Tara, excuse me, Tara. Sylvette, could you perform a roll call?
Sure. Matt Turk,
Here.
Glenn Geisinger. Is he on here?
He's not. He texted me he can't make it.
Okay. John Hayes,
Here.
Ted Rosenberger, I see him on there. And Tara Zirinsky. Here.
Back from? Perfect, thank you. I don't, do you have the agenda right there? I do. Take a quick look at it. We have, obviously, first item is the approval of our minutes. We have no public comment, correct?
Public comment.
Thanks. First item would be the approval of the minutes as presented for the July 23rd meeting of the executive committee. Motion.
So moved.
Tara, got a motion. I'll take the second from John on that one. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. We have our invoices from Floyer Perucci. You should have also seen a legal update on that one. Looks like everything's moving in good shape there. And take a motion to approve the invoice as presented by Floyer Perucci for July 2020.
So moved.
Thank you. Take a second. Tara's got the second. All in favor of approving the invoice, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. And final item for action is we have a agreement with PennCap that we have to alter, correct? Darren?
It's basically an extension and a slight amendment. This is the access easement from the warehouse to our cargo ramp for the Amazon cargo operation. Basically, they're changing contractors. They've actually already changed contractors, and the lease will be switching over to Pinnacle Logistics. So the easement is granted to 2202 Hangar Place LP, but it does give access to the contractor of Pinnacle. And then this also extends it for 2 years with about 18 months, I guess, actually, with 2 possible 1-year extension renewal options on there as well.
So is 2202 Hangar Place, that's PennCap?
Yes.
Okay. Okay.
Any questions?
Any
Move
questions?
to approve.
Thank you, John. Take a second. Ted? Tara?
I'll second.
Tara's got a second. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right. We will approve that temporary easement agreement with PennCap as presented. Thanks, Darren.
Thank you.
We've got development updates. I think we may have need for an executive session, but if it's okay with you, Tom, can we hold those, that update for our board meeting? We'll just roll it in because I think it is of general interest to the board as well.
Absolutely.
Great. If there's any, Judge, there, you had no other need for an executive session for today, correct?
No, there's no need for executive session on my part.
Thank you, sir. If there's no other business, I will take a motion to adjourn.
Move.
Tara's got the motion. Give the second to John, I assume, and we are then adjourned. That's the quickest ever executive.